In Luke chapter 12, Jesus tells a story that came to life for me after I spent time with Joe and his uncle researching for Scouting the Divine. Jesus is teaching his followers to be on guard against all forms of greed. Now, when Jesus teaches through a parable, it's not just a story or an anecdote. It can almost be compared to like a political cartoon in which certain details are exaggerated in order to make a point. In this particular parable, Jesus describes a rich farmer whose harvest was so abundant that he didn't have any place to store it. Rather than give away or sell the excess, he decides to tear down his barns and build larger ones where he could store all his grain and goods. His reasoning may have been that with all the savings, he could have a posh life, eating, drinking, and celebrating. But there may be something more. Remember that the ancient Middle East was an agrarian society. You never knew which year would produce a feast and which would yield a famine. If this farmer had a bumper crop, odds are that the farmers around him had large yields too, lowering the overall worth of his crop. Saving up his crop for a famine year may have made fiscal sense. Regardless of the man's reasoning, God calls the rich farmer a fool. That night would be his last. All his abundance would go to someone else. Why? I'm not convinced the core issue was the size of his harvest or the storage containers, but that he viewed the abundance that he had as his own. His attitude is laid bare when he uses the word I 6 times to describe his accomplishment and plans for the future, without thought of God or others. The unmistakable mention of my fruits and my barns and my goods and my soul eliminates the space for others or even an acknowledgement of God. Spending time on a farm in Nebraska with Joe and his uncle and looking at an empty granary was a portrait of the truth behind Jesus' story, namely that with everything God gives, we have a responsibility to use what we have been entrusted with as good stewards. When we choose to use what we have been given wisely, greed dissipates. The wisdom of God will always challenge us to place everything that we have before Him and use what we have been given in a way that He desires, which at times will mean emptying our silos on behalf of others.